Hi, everybody. This is Lowell, and we're talking about basic sound system setup. And we've talked about inputs with microphones and cables and connections and the basic mixing console setup. Now, I wanted to just talk briefly about what is known as outboard signal processing. And so, back in the day, in non-digital world, analog, we call it, we used to run copper wires that would, be the snake that would connect everything. Now you have Cat 5, Cat 6. And so the way that the subject that I'm talking about, outboard signal processing, worked back then is that you would actually loop a cable out of the board into a signal processing unit and then back into the board. And that's what was called outboard signal processing. And so those units now are built into the digital mixing consoles as standalone pieces of software. But they originally were actually a rack-mounted piece of gear that you would connect into your mixing console with quarter-inch phone jacks. And so essentially, and I'm just going to use that as a metaphor, kind of a jumping off point to talk about the digital versions that are available today. But if you were to look at an old rack, you would find a EQ rack, that a multi-band EQ, and where you would grab certain frequencies, lows, mids, highs. There maybe be 100 of them, these little tiny volume faders. Think of it as the notes on a piano, raising and lowering them and creating an EQ that way. Another unit that was very common was reverb units, and all sorts of different versions of that. And then you could also have compression, and that's pretty much the main outboard signal processors that were available back then. Now you have this plethora of software that basically fits into those same categories. The most important two are compression and EQ, equalization. And so, and there's all sorts of different versions of that, but essentially what compression does is compression will squeeze the audio signal to where the louds are softer and the softs are louder. And so when you send it out as a signal, then it's more easily it just goes into a radio or goes into a sound system more tight, I guess would be a good word to say. It causes the signal to be tighter and more squeezed together in a way that will fit through a loudspeaker, and people can perceive all the different elements of it. Compression happens when you send a signal into it over the airwaves, into a TV, to a radio. You compress the signal in order to make it more easily transferable, but also more easily understood when people are hearing it through a sound system. And so that's the first probably important part. And different people have different ideas about which should come first, compression or EQ. But EQ is taking those frequencies and exaggerating certain parts. If you have, a lot of people in our, current pop culture and really throughout history, it's worked this way. You want a strong bass, and so the stronger your bass is, it pretty much causes all the other frequencies that are higher to basically stand or stack on top of that nice, good foundation of a bass. And so you can raise your EQ in the bass frequencies. And then if you want things to be brighter or more intelligible, if for speech to become more intelligible, all the sibilances in speech or singing, then you would raise your mid-highs to highs to make that better. And then you have to be careful with the mid-range, because if you boost the mid-range too much, then it's going to end up sounding hollow and sort of weird sounding. We don't, as humans, we don't really like having too much mid-range or low mids. And so usually it's sort of if you were to look at the graphic EQ that used to be on the, screwed into the rack mount, you would see what we called a smile. And so you'd have highs, or, from my vantage point, lows boosted, and then a curve down into the mid-range, and then sweeping back up into the highs. And so that sort of smile curve was a pleasing way to use EQ. And then kind of the last piece or part to a mixing situation would be to add reverb. Now, if you're in a very resonant room, then you don't really need that. A lot of large rooms back in the day were resonant and not meant to be controllable with sound systems, and so you would have already a built-in resonance to the room. So adding reverb to that situation would just basically muddy things up. But if you add reverb to a dry room, a room that essentially sounds terrible if you don't have some sort of electronic reverb, then that's really helpful, and you can choose different lengths of reverbs. A lot of people don't realize that what reverb is a bunch of small echoes happening, and so it's a digital reverb is trying to make essentially what would happen in a concert hall with all the reflectivity, the acoustic attributes of a concert hall. And so what happens in a concert hall is you have all these different angles on the walls and on the ceiling that cause multiple reflections to where people are sitting in the audience. And so they'll be hearing echoes from behind them, from their sides, from above them. And so that's what a reverb unit does. It's just, it has a bunch of echoes that are sequentially timed to hit the ear at different speeds. And so the human ear perceives it as warmth or reverberation, but it's just a whole bunch of echoes. And so those three things. There are other important outboard signal processing, which now is built in to the software. But those are the three most important things that in any basic mixing console you would be dealing with. And I'm sure that many of you have worked with all of this. And but in my history, it started with these rack mounts and figuring out how they were connected and in sequence, and the cables behind these rack mounts could become a rat's nest and quite convoluted if you weren't careful. And so the digital certainly is a step above that. So that's my little talk on outboard signal processing. Hopefully it helps.